Okay, good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody here to get back into our study for the spring in Revelation. So, as Shakespeare would say, with no further ado, let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer. Blessed are you, O Lord our God. Thank you so much for letting us be here to open your word again. Father, like always, we pray that you would help us to always get deep into your word. And we ask that you would help us to understand the things that we need to understand. Blessed are you, O Lord. We thank you so much. We pray this in the name of our Savior, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so last time we were talking about the message to the congregation at Ephesus, and we looked at the map and saw that these are real churches along these big, major Roman roads that they built. Those Romans, boy, they were good at building roads. And so along the Great North Road and then the Imperial Post Road coming over, and there are those churches in the exact order that we read in Revelation. Okay, who has the electrocution button back there? You know, if I go too long or something, you press it. Stop it. And so we also talked about not just these are real people with real problems. Oh my goodness, real problems. We just can't even appreciate today, even reading some of the other historical accounts. I mean, yeah, we can read it, it's words, but I can barely imagine experiencing this. You know, you there with your kids and your family, and you're going through all this, and you don't know if in the next few minutes there's going to be this big knock on your door, and there's going to be the soldiers from the authorities at Ephesus or wherever to get you for some reason. You just don't know. It's amazingly scary. So we talked about the first vision of John here in chapter 1 and how that this would be no big surprise to the ancient Hebrews because it drops exactly into the apocalyptic literature style that they are so used to in Ezekiel, in Daniel, in some of the other books that are not in the Bible, Enoch, Assumption of Moses, etc. This would be totally obvious to them, but not to us. And so we look at it and we go, oh man, what does this mean? You know, you're going to be in dire straits for 10 days. Okay, what's 10 days mean? And we try to make it mean what we think it means, bless our hearts, you know, but modern Americans, we grew up differently, we think differently, we have a very different approach to things. We expect things to be exactly chronological. If you tell me something first, I expect that to occur before the second thing that you tell me. And I expect that to occur before the third thing that you tell me. Not so much in the ancient world. So we have to just kind of, as I often say, drop in our Old Testament brain, and that's about the best we can do, and then we can see more of the images. So the first big image that we see is in Revelation 1. If you have your Bibles handy, flip over to Revelation 1, and let's just look at verse 12 and following for a few minutes. So John says he was in the Spirit on the day of the Lord, and I heard a voice, and I turned to see the voice behind me, verse 12, and on turning, I saw 7 golden lampstands, candle stands, something like that, depending on how you want to translate it. And in the middle of these was a person, a human being-looking person, but not a regular human being-looking person, using the name that we see in Daniel so often, the Son of Man, one like an offspring of humans, basically. So not an angel, not a monster, not a creature, like a person. But he was clothed in a long robe with a golden sash around his chest, and we think back to the Old Testament and what the priests were required to wear in the temple, long robe all the way to the ground, and the sash and so forth. So the golden candlesticks, and it's like an image, we go, okay, what on earth? And his hairs were like white, like snow. His eyes were like flames of fire, and his feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the voice of many waters, and in his right hand he held 7 stars, and from his mouth came a sharp, two-edged sword. Now clearly, this is not in the real physical world, right? Because how could you speak, for example, if you've got a big, sharp, two-edged sword protruding out of your mouth, right? So this is all imagery of power, and the white hair, imagery of ancientness, and so forth and so forth. And so then he said to John, okay, I got a job for you, John. Got a job for you. Record the stuff that you're going to see and I want you to send it to the 7 churches. And he names the 7 churches in the order, starting at Ephesus and going up north, up the Great North Road, and then cutting down on the Great Imperial Post Road, and doing that very common trade route, and there they are. So then,
which is unique to some degree, because most every other writing, it was just kind of like, tell them these things. But this one, he doesn't do that. He says, I need you to write this down specifically.
Write what you're going to see and send it to these guys, right? Send it to these guys. We talked about why just 7, and I said my opinion, which means you've got to be careful. But my opinion is this is the great importance the people of those days put on numbers. Number 7 implies the way it ought to be, the whole, the full, the correct kind of thing. And so we looked at this. And so let's just back up a little bit and look at the message to Ephesus. And so, to the messenger at the assembly, right? I talked about how our translators, bless their hearts, it's a terribly difficult job. And they translate this angel, but it just means messenger. Remember the example I gave you in the New Testament, John's disciples came to Jesus and said, hey, are you the guy? And when John's messengers asked him that, the real text there is John's angels. So, but our translators have fixed it for us. And that's okay, I guess. And so to the messenger for the assembly of Ephesus, right? Hey, these are the words of him who holds the 7 stars and who walks among the golden candlesticks. I know your works. Remember, we talked about every single assembly gets an introductory sentence from the one with the burnished bronze feet, something like that imagery of power, etc. The second sentence is always what I call the I know statement. I know what's going on there, guys. And some people look at that and go, oh, that's kind of scary. You know what I'm up to. I don't think it's scary. I think it's so comforting. I know what you're going through. I got your back, right? Is the kind of idea. I know. So every church gets that I know statement. And then some statement about what's going on, some praise, then usually some criticism, and then finally what I call the ear statement, right? Every single church, all 7, end up with that. If you've got ears, use them, right? He that hath an ear, let him hear. And that hear means, yes, hear, but do it, obey it, listen up. Just like if you tell your kids, you better listen to me, you don't mean just use your eardrums to vibrate a little bit. No, you mean do it, right? So it's kind of the combo, just like we use today. So I know you guys are just working so hard, toil, weariness. You're just worn out, basically, and you're enduring patiently. And you don't put up with those who are evil, but you test them, the people that call themselves to be apostles. Isn't that amazing? Even back then, first century, you got people roaming around saying, oh, I'm an apostle, and let me tell you the real deal. You go, excuse me, that's not the real deal, What are you doing? Remember, even Paul said, even if I come to you, or even if an angel comes to you and tries to pass off something else, let them be anathema, let them be accursed. Because there's going to be wolves, unfortunately, there's going to be wolves.
They were claiming to be apostles. That's the term used by them that had the works of the Spirit, correct?
Well,
they were eyewitnesses of Christ.
It depends on how they're using it. That word, once again, is a very common Greek word in the Greek world today, apostolos. It means one who is sent. So, if I need, Dean, you to run over and tell these people to go put out this house fire or something, then you are my apostle. I sent you. But now the way we kind of mean it in the New Testament is the people Jesus picked and he sent out with his authority for a special purpose. That's how we use it. But in the Roman world, it was a very common thing. The king would send his messenger, his apostle.
But in that statement, that would be what you're talking about.
Well, that's what I would intuit. Somebody coming in and saying, look, Jesus sent me. So I have extra authority, I have extra knowledge, you better listen to me. And that's what I would look at this, because the rest of the text implies that, right? Let me go over here to Tom, and then I'll come back. Charles. Tom?
Paul would say, I'm an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ. In other words, my being sent out is by his authority.
That's right.
Whereas the people that came, like when you read in Acts, you know, or the ones in Galatians that had come into that congregation, you see that in 2 Corinthians, they're claiming to be apostles of Christ. And Paul says they're false.
That's right.
He says that, and so, yeah, it was not a surprising thing for the first century to be dealt with like this, because, that was, if you look at all Paul's letters to the congregations, they all deal with elements of false teaching and people that were sent.
That's a big, big problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so we often think the apostles, that means the 12, the first 12 Jesus handpicked, but not necessarily. Remember when he sent out 70 some odd others for a special job? Those were sent, they were apostles by definition. But we still think about the original 12, but it doesn't have to be the original 12. When the Bible wants to make a point that he's talking about them, he will say typically the 12. And now you know which group of apostles, the ones that Jesus walked with, ate with, etc., for all those years. I think reading between the lines, it's just 2 years. Some people say, no, it's 3 years. But I think the most powerful biblical warrant is just for 2 short years to train up these guys. Yeah, Charles, you had it.
You know, along with what we're talking about, I've noticed in a lot of denominations lately, they're starting to use more and more flowery titles for the ministers in their church, or for the elders, or different people in the church. And one that I've noticed lately is apostle. They're calling themselves apostles. And is that an appropriate term or inappropriate?
Well, it all depends on your point of view, doesn't it? If they think that in some fashion, even though it's 2,000 years in the future, they feel like the Lord is talking to them and sending them on a special mission, I guess they could justify calling themselves an apostle. Now, I would not do that. I would limit my definition to the ones that were able to interact directly with Jesus on planet Earth in the first century AD. That's what I would say.
That's the way I look at it. And I wouldn't call someone an apostle.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit over the top. But you know, we can ask for more expertise. You were talking about all these places using flowery language, you know, apostle and so forth. We could talk to the chief pastor here. I love it. I love it. Oh my goodness. So now here's the criticism for Ephesus, right?
But here's,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
There's something that needs to be explained, I think, and you know, you backed up on the word church, you know, and there just needs to be a way that we can describe things, right, that we understand. You know, so you think about like Acts 19, there's at least 3 verses in Acts 19 that use the word ecclesia, that is not talking about the church.
Yeah, and the assembly of the people and
at the riot.
At the riot.
You know, if we would have used the word assembly every time, then anytime we were talking about the church, we would have to put a qualifier in that would make us understand that we're talking about, like whoever said, I'm apostle of Jesus. I don't know who said it here this morning, but there has to be a qualifier in that denotes what we're talking about, right? And so it's just easy to use the word church, because that way in Acts 19 the whole church was confused at these sayings. Well, the church wasn't confused. The ecclesia, the assembled group of Ephesians there, were confused, but it wasn't the church. But so if we translated every time assembly, then we would have to put qualifiers in and actually, to some degree, add to the text just so we could delineate, you know, and then that's a challenge, right?
That is a challenge.
There's a challenge with that, and so you know, and just reading between 2 languages, like you read Spanish and English versions of the Bible, it's translated a lot different in a lot of places, and so just using these terms is not necessarily nothing malicious or negative.
Oh no, it's just.
And I don't think you're implying that.
Lack of clarity. Yeah. And I'm just making a point that we often do, that the church is the people, the body, right? We could substitute in the body at Ephesus. We could substitute in the assembly at Ephesus, the congregation. And you know, like I mentioned last time, I think that when Tyndale in the early 1500s did his translation into English, That time, it still wasn't quite modern English, I would say, but close. And he decided, looking at the Greek, the oldest text they had, the most original text, and we came across that word, that ekklesia, out of, like where we get our word exit, and that second part, kaleo, means to call. It's just a common verb, to call. I could call Chris, and I would say, ego kaleo Chris. I call Chris. So to call out. And so it was used in the Greek-Roman world to mean we need to get together and talk about something. School meeting, council meeting of the town. And like in Ephesus, when Demetrius got all upset that Paul was messing up his silver Artemis souvenir business, they called an assembly. And if you look, it says they had an ecclesia. Well, we don't translate it church there, do we, in the Bible? And so Tyndale, when he was doing his translation, he said either congregation or assembly all the time. And then when King James was authorizing the King James Version, he made a special rule to his translation team. He said, do not do that. Every time you see that word, ecclesia or ecclesia, depending on how you want to pronounce it, where we get our English word ecclesiastical, of the church, King James said, look, when you come to that word, I better see church. Don't you be writing congregation or assembly. And what do you think the translation team said to the king? Yes, your majesty. May you live forever, right? Exactly. Of course. But like I said, I give the translators a lot of sympathy because it's super difficult to do. And that's why it's handy to occasionally dig in a little bit deeper and see what's really going on and not just believe everybody. And so now here's the criticism part of Ephesus, verse 4. But here's my problem with you guys. Now, of course, I'm really going paraphrase now, aren't I? Here's my problem with you guys. I have this against you. You have abandoned your first love, King James says. And a lot of people say, oh, that means you stopped loving Jesus. Well, if you look at what John actually wrote, the love you had at first, you have abandoned it. It means you don't act like that anymore. What happened to you? And that's an interesting word, abandon. You purposely decided to not do it no more. Now, we don't know exactly what that means. Is that in the body, people weren't really helping others? We just don't know. Anything would be conjecture. And so the vision that John heard, that he was supposed to give him the message. So remember, here's the warning. Remember what it was like before you fell away from this, when you still had love. And do the works, the ergon, the activities, the behaviors. Behave like you used to behave. Act like you used to act. If you don't, I'm going to come back and get your lampstand. Remember the lampstand, the temple scene? Lampstand is a symbol of the church. That thankfully, that is explained to us in the text. Unless you turn around, unless you repent. Metanoia, change your mind. And then now, finishing up on one, at least, much of a praise as you can do. But I'll give you this. At least you hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So if you've got an ear, use it. To the one that conquers, I will grant you to eat of the tree of life. Now, I highlighted that eat because I think it's going to play in to what I think is going on with the Nicolaitans. So I got them both colored in yellow. Eat Nicolaitans. So let's look at Nicolaitans. There's been a whole lot of papers, commentaries, etc., written about this. What are, or who are, the Nicolaitans? It's only twice in the Bible, both in Revelation, 2:6 and 2:15. So two different churches have this comment about the Nicolaitans. So who are they? Surprisingly, there's a lot of commentaries and things that say, using your concordance, which is one of the most powerful and one of the most awful tools, because it can lead you astray so much. If you're just looking at the same word, the same English word in the Bible and finding every one of them and then trying to make extrapolations, well, you don't know that translation is correct for that one spot over here. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. So now, do I use concordance? I use Greek concordance to show me all the Greek words that are the same that I'm looking at. Yeah, but do I use an English concordance? Almost never, because I think it leads you astray too much. And so people did this and they said, Acts 6, when they had to pick the 7 deacons. Oh, there's 7 again, right? 7 deacons. One of them was a Gentile convert named Nicholas. And so then people will jump to that and say, well, my concordance says Nicholas over here as a deacon, so this must be a deacon that went bananas and started teaching wrong stuff, and so that's who it is. Now, any problem with that extrapolation? I should say, is there any good thing about that extrapolation? The answer is no. Nicholas is actually a pretty common name, so there are lots of people named Nicholas. Oh, that reminds me. I was reading an article not too long ago, and it's talking about somebody spent like 10 years of their life searching all the ancient documents they could get their hands on, not just the Bible, but every ancient document. And the question they were asking is, what were the most common names back in the first century? And for women, what would you guess? The most common name for women in the first century? Mary. Salome. Yep. And so that's why you always had to use a surname. Mary, daughter of, and then you start adding more and more adjectives so you know which Mary. Mary of Magdala, the little community of Magdala. We call her Mary Magdalene, right? But you had to add that little adjective so you know which Mary. I mean, there's Marys all over the place, right? So there's Chris's all over the place. There's quite a few Glens all over the place. So now we at least have, surname to add on, and then social security number, or whatever, and we can find it. So what do I think about this? Scratch that idea out of your head. There's zero biblical warrant for that. It's maximal conjecture with no supporting evidence whatsoever. Now, could it be? Yeah, it could be. It could be Nicholas that went bananas and started teaching wrong stuff. But now here's what I think it is. Since we're digging into Hebrew culture, Hebrew thinking, we know that Hebrews tend to think in pictures that they paint with words. And the pictures, like the priestly picture and the golden lampstands, et cetera, quite a bit different than modern Americans. We're so literal and so chronological and so mathematical and so technological. We just don't think that way. And so here's what I think is going on. Maybe this is talking about people that are promoting, oh, it's okay to eat idol food and stuff like that. It's okay. Now, why do I think that? Here's why I think that. In Hebrew, and remember, who's writing this? A Hebrew. How's a Hebrew think? Like a Hebrew. So even a lot of people I've talked to that are really, really good in English that come over from other countries to study at the university, and they're really good in English, they tell me usually that they still think in Tagalog. They still think in Spanish, right? And they get really fast at translating in their head into English, and they say it, but they're thinking in their language. They go, okay, wow, that's kind of neat, right? So, and the few languages I know, I do the same thing. I formulate the idea in English in my head because that's what my head is used to. And then I think, okay, what am I doing here? I'm doing Latin, okay, la, la, la. And it takes a few seconds depending on how much in practice I am. And so if you're thinking in Hebrew, which I think John is doing, there's a Hebrew verb, nochal. And here it is, nochal. And so in English, the best I can do to transliterate it would be like this, N-O-K-H-A-L. Here it is in Hebrew. Nun, Aleph, Kaf, Lamed. So nochal. And this means we will eat. And so I think these are people that go, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you think. I'm going to go get my Zeus burger and hang out with my buddies at the Temple of Zeus because they got Zeus burgers today. Tomorrow, I'm going to go hang out at the Hades temple, and man, they got good hot dogs there or something. Now, of course, I'm being semi-facetious, but I think that's really what's going on. And they're promoting this is totally fine. But you'll see, like Chris alluded to, all these churches, it reminds me so much of Romans 12. When Paul says, look, don't let the world get you. Or, like I say, I love the J.B. Phillips translation that he was translating with his students in England while the Nazis were dropping bombs on them and they were deep in the bomb shelters. And they said, well, while we're here, why don't we just translate this? Make a new translation, the J.B. Phillips translation. And so he said, don't let the world, it's kind of a quasi-paraphrase, I think, don't let the world push you into its mold. And, that's what the world is doing. It's like a factory I saw that were making some fenders for a car. And they had these big sheets of steel, big sheets of steel, and they would grab them, put them on the machine, and the machine had this big stamping thing that would go wham, and it would stamp it into the shape of a fender, and it would also cut the excess off, and then the fender would go down to be primed and painted, and whatever got under that big machine with probably 50,000 pounds of force, it got stamped into the shape of a fender for this car. So that's what the world is trying to do, isn't it? Oh, this is okay. Oh, don't worry about this. Oh, yeah, you can do this. This is fine. And so when somebody says, well, is Revelation of any value today? If you are correct, meaning me, that it's a preterist interpretation is best, which means most of the stuff applies to the first century people, which is what I think, then why should we bother to read it? I go, oh my goodness. You are looking over the shoulder of these people that are suffering from the same types of pressures and forces that you are being exposed to today. The names have changed a little bit, but that's all. The human nature is the same. The culture is very different, but the human nature is the same. What are we being exposed to? Same pressures. Conform to the world, conform to the world, conform to the world. If you conform to the world, we're going to like you more. We're going to promote you at your job. We're going to be nicer to you. And in the Roman era, that was very true. Very true. If you are a good, self-respecting Roman, you pay due diligence to the Roman gods and the Roman state, then you're okay. If you don't, and we get too annoyed with you, then we'll dip you in Tyre and Sodom. We'll dip you in tar and light you up like a big candlestick lining the emperor's avenue to the party. Oh my goodness. So if this is true, then how would you transliterate that from Hebrew into Greek? Because these guys are writing this in Greek, right? So here's what it would be in Greek. The Nicolaitone, tone Nicolaitone. And now if you take that and move it into English, what's it going to be? Nicolaitans. So I think this is people that also have a strong connection to the teachings of, remember Numbers 22? Balaam, Balak, where Balak, the king of Moab, got the prophet, fairly famous prophet Balaam, and said, curse these Israelites. They are a pestilence on me. Curse them. And God said, nope, don't do it. Remember the donkey? Because he was going to go do it and get a big salary, a big commission. And finally the donkey stopped him, right? And we have this wonderful story, Balaam and the talking donkey. So what was he supposed to do? He was supposed to be promoting these Israelites to get back into idols and idol food. Hey, just chill, everything's okay. So that's what I think the Nicolaitans are. They're a force inside the body of people that are saying the exact opposite of what John is saying in Revelation. Look, stay away from idols. This idol stuff, it's dragging you back into the world. And now these people, the Nicolaitans, are saying, let us eat. Let's go get us a Zeus burger. It's okay. And they're pulling the people the other way. And I think that's part of the reason we have all these admonitions to, look, test these apostles and see if they're false. These people that claim they're Jews, but they're not, be careful, that we see in Revelation. Now, is that absolutely for sure? No, it's my best idea. And that's why I think the text says eat. So these people are saying eat idol food, but I tell you what, if you conquer this, here's what you're really going to be eating. Yeah, go ahead and eat, but here's what I'm going to give you to eat, the tree of life. And that makes this beautiful, like bookends on that statement. Yeah, Tom?
The book of Jude, it refers to those that work into their love feast, but they're misleading them. And he references, they're like Balaam. They're misleading the people. They go to your love feast and mislead you. And they're spoken of as, like blackest darkness and is preserved for them. So it's a real negative view. Whatever category, he doesn't use this term. He does talk about people that come into your feast and are misleading you and are taking advantage of it.
Yeah. So, these crazy ideas that permeate are not anything new. Our culture, we think about, hey, all this, I was watching either a Facebook or YouTube video, and it was this church in Florida. I don't remember what brand of church it was, but anyway, what caught my eye was the title, and it said, Drag Day at the Church of something. And I thought, drag day? Does that mean like drag in all of your friends? What's that mean? So I had to click it, right? It's total clickbait. I had to click it. And this church was saying, today, with the idea of openness and acceptance, we're going to have drag queens do our performance up and down the main aisle. And I went, and that was wonderful. It's all fine, delightful. So they said, I thought, oh my goodness.
So Nicholas, he was a follower of Christ, but he left the church and started.
Well, that's what some people say. I think that is false. So some people say Nicholas, one of the first deacons, went bananas and started teaching wrong. But there's no reason to say that at all. I think it's a group of people that are called Nicolaitans because they're telling everybody it's okay to eat idol food. Idols are good. I'm sorry? Well, I think it's derived from this verb, nokal, which is a Hebrew verb that means I will eat. In other words, I look at this and I think, I don't care what you think. I'm going to eat it anyway. That's what these people are kind of, I think, reading between the lines is what they're saying. But now still in commentaries today, you'll look and find Nicholas, the deacon from Acts, went astray. There's just no biblical warrant for that whatsoever. But you're still going to see it out there. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. See, that's why I say I get on a roll.
No, I guess my comment would be when it's talking about eating idol food, in the culture then, it was kind of like they were straddling the fence, and I know I've been to Africa the last time I went, and I did a ladies' day, and there was a discussion of, I'm a Maasai, but I've become a Christian. I still have Maasai family and friends that have these cultural traditions. Is it okay for me to go and be there? And so from that perspective, going to get a Zeus burger, well, that's going to be okay as long as you are not worshiping Zeus and partaking of that food in a pagan worship manner. Does that make sense?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And it totally makes sense to me from a human cultural idea, right? So if I shift totally the way I look at something religiously, well, everything else is still the same right now, isn't it? My family, what we eat in our family, our little family celebrations and so forth. That's like we often tend to think that on Pentecost, Acts 2, that when those thousands of people were converted, they were 99.9% Jews because they were there for Pentecost celebration in Jerusalem. We tend to think that, boom, instantly, they became Christians like us. And so Christians like us, we have no cultural or religious aversion to eating unclean animals like pork. And so we think they all ran out and got a pulled pork sandwich that day. And I kind of almost maybe sort of thought that way a little bit. But then if you stop for a second, you think, no, of course not. In fact, the next few chapters of Acts tells us that's not right. Where did Paul and John run to every time they could? They ran to temple. Where did all the early Christians worship until the temple authorities kicked them out by force? They ran to the temple. So they were culturally Jews. Of course they were. They just changed the essentials. This is the Messiah. We've always been told there's a Messiah coming for 1,000 years or more. And so now we know who the Messiah is. Oh, am I going to get a pork sandwich? No. I was raised that you don't eat pork. I'm not going to change that. No problem. Now, hopefully, they're not going to make a problem with their brothers and sisters that think it's okay. Remember, Paul in Corinthians and also in Romans makes a big discussion about that. Don't get all up in arms about this. It's nothing, but if you see it hurting your brother and sister, don't do it, okay? Don't do it. We know it's nothing, but don't hurt anybody. Very good point, right? There's acting with love. If you're giving up something that you really love to do because you know it hurts your brother and sister, they can't quite wrap their brain around it, and you say, oh, it's okay, come on, let's go get us a big pork sandwich. And then your brother Eleazar says, oh, I don't know. I know you guys tell me it's okay now, but I don't know. I still think it's not right. Oh, come on. And you sort of peer pressure them into doing it. Is that right? No, of course not. That's terrible. But what a tough era to live in, that big transition period. And one big problem that came in the next few hundred years, slowly, in the Christian world, and this is one of the most terrible things, that the Christian world kind of adopted this really anti-Semitic idea. You guys killed the Lord of glory, crucified him, you and your children. Didn't your guys say to Pilate, let it be on us and our children? So be it. And then anything Jewish was like hated. Now we could extrapolate that into the 1930s and talk about Hitler and the Nazis, kind of building upon that. Indirectly, maybe directly. So it's interesting. Bless all of our hearts. We're all kind of a mess. And all you can do is the best you can do, by definition. So now at the end of each church message, I want to have this slide up, and I'm going to divide the compliments on the left side and the criticisms on the right side. So let's look at Ephesus. Compliment. Okay, look, I know you guys at Ephesus. Just like he would say, I'm sure, I know you guys at KW. I know what you're dealing with. I know the opportunities. I know the problems. I know what people are doing to you. I know what's happening in your life. It's terrible. I know, fill in the blank. You lost your job, whatever. I know that stuff. But now let me tell you what's really important. So I know you're working hard. I know that you are enduring all this stuff with great patience. James makes a big point about trying to have the patience like a farmer. The farmer plants, but tomorrow there's nothing there, is it? But he knows that eventually the crop will come. Be patient like a farmer, James says. I know that you do not put up with evil. You're not trying to snuggle up as close as you can without crossing some line, right? You're not saying, okay, well, I'm not going to eat a Zeus burger because he was chief of the gods, but what if I went with a minor god because their temple is having corn dogs today, and I go get me a cheap corn dog, and it's a minor god. I'll go over to the temple of Pan. No, you don't play that game. You test even people that come and say they're apostles to see if they're lying to you. Just because some famous person comes in and tells you blah, 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 you test it. It's like the Bereans. Go back to what Luke told us. These guys, they listened to Paul, but they didn't just slurp it down like true. They searched the scripture to see if he was right. And despite all this, you haven't given up and got so wearisome you quit. Well, that's a big compliment. And you hate the work of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Now, if I'm correct, that this is a reference to people that are promoting idols and things like that against the admonitions of John, that makes sense to me, especially that last little thing that we looked at. If you overcome this, I will let you eat the tree of life, right? Isn't that interesting? If these are the people that say, let us eat, we don't care, we're going to eat anyway, then if you conquer that pressure, what's your reward? I'm going to let you eat. Yeah, you're talking about eat. Okay, let's talk about eating. I'm going to let you eat of the tree of life. That would be a very, very Jewish way to express that. Now, criticism, you purposely left behind the love you used to have. Now, what does that mean? I don't think it means what some of our commentaries also say. They no longer love Jesus. I don't think so. I would think, doesn't all this stuff kind of indicate they still love Jesus? I would think so. I think it's they don't operate in an attitude of love anymore. Sacrificial love. That's what I think. They've lost that. They've abandoned it purposely, which is kind of sad. Okay, now, church number 2. Let's go up the Great North Road and let's talk about the next city in the list, just going straight through the list, up the Great North Road, and the city of Smyrna. And so like for Ephesus, let's look at some of the major features of Smyrna. So the city of Smyrna, we see on the map, was pretty famous, pretty wealthy. One of its main exports was myrrh, frankincense and myrrh. used in perfumes and embalming, used in medicine. It's mildly anesthetic. So if you've got a hurt, a boo-boo, then you can take some myrrh either as ointment or take it orally. And it's like an aspirin, mild anesthetic. And so it's very, very useful. And so they made tons of money from this. Of all of these 7 cities, everything is gone today, except the ruins there, except for this. It's been renamed to Izmir, Turkey, but you could go and stand in the same spot in an active city today for Smyrna, modern Izmir, Turkey. In 6 BC, there was a big war there, and they pretty much wiped it down to the ground. And then when Alexander the Great came through, he said, well, that's a shame. Let's rebuild it. So it was kind of reborn from this total destruction. It was very famous for a medical school there, and one of John's disciples, Polycarp. We often don't think about this, but why wouldn't all the disciples have their disciples, right? Their trainees. And extra biblical writings and so forth indicate that's true. And one of John's disciples, named Polycarp, isn't that an interesting name? Polycarp, was killed there in 155 AD. It's only mentioned twice in the Bible, both in Revelation 1:11 and 2:8. And along with Philadelphia, so Philadelphia is just go straight across to the Great Post Road, straight across from here. Now, you wouldn't do that because there's mountains. This is so mountainous territory. So you'd follow the valley roads, be a lot easier. So along with Philadelphia, no negative comments. Amazing. Only 2 churches, 2 assemblies, 2 congregations got no hard criticism. Smyrna, Philadelphia. So let's look at what the message was. And to the, what am I going to say here? Messenger of the assembly or congregation, both those would be fine. That gets us away from our modern bureaucratic kind of definition, or even worse, building definition. Oh, time to go to church. We know what that means, right? Okay, so I'm not too vigorous on that. Body. Worship. We're going to worship. Assembly, congregation. Yeah, so I like what William Tyndale thought was the better translation of that Greek word. Congregation or assembly. The one that King James made a rule, do not use that word. So write the words of the first and the last, the one who died and is now living again. So there's like that great statement from earlier in John's vision. The Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the one that was dead and now is living. I know you guys. There's the I know statement. I know that things are kind of bad. I know that you guys are really poor. But you know what? If you really think about it from a non-earthly perspective, you are rich. But I know from an earthly perspective you're poor. I don't know why they're poor. It's a fairly prosperous city. I know about the slander that you're getting, the blasphemy, the bad talking about you. I know that. And I know that a bunch of that's coming from people that say they're Jews, but they are not. Now, what does that mean? Well, we do know there were quite a few so-called God-fearers, Gentiles that were coming in to worship with the Jews, and that had been the case for many, 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 many years. And we also know a lot of those people that were kind of converted from the Gentile world into the Jewish world were really aggressive and nasty toward the Christians, and they viewed the Christians as like traitors. And that kind of makes sense, right? If you, over many years, you decide, you read, you learn, you talk to people, and you think the Jews are right. And so you go to synagogue if you're not in Jerusalem. If you're in Jerusalem, you go to temple. And so you think the Jews are right. And now here comes this upstart group that all of your Jewish friends say are blasphemers. Then what are you going to do? And generally speaking, these Gentile converts would be the political powers in these cities. So, but really, they're a synagogue of Satan. So we'll stop right there. Let's just do one more comment about this. So when you see that synagogue of Satan, what pops in your mind? Just generically. Synagogue of Satan. First of all, it sounds really bad, doesn't it? Synagogue of Satan.
Well, you get some kind of, outlandish, pentagram and people jumping around the fire.
Goat head mask,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, just craziness.
Devil worship. Yeah, exactly, right? Sounds bad. But now, that word synagogue there, it's a Greek word. It's just a Greek word that the Jews adopted as their version of church, assembly, congregation, worship. That's what that means. They said, that's a good word, let's use it. In Greek, it means gather together. That's really all what it means. Gather together. And now this Satan, we have to decide, is it being used here as a proper noun or as a job title description? Because that's a Hebrew word, Satan. It's an old Hebrew word used for thousands of years. It means something like adversary or prosecutor, something like that. Or is it the proper noun, capital S, Satan? We have to decide that, because really, the synagogue of Satan means the assembly of the adversary. But now we've got to think a little bit deeper and say, what did John mean? Did he mean the capital S, Satan, or the prosecutor, S? And we've got to decide. And we will try to look through that and decide next week. And we'll start there at verse 10. Don't be afraid. The devil's going to throw some of you into prison, and you're going to be tested for 10 days. What's that mean? 10 days? Literally 10 days? Okay, it's Saturday, so I get 4 more days to go. Well, we'll look at that next time. So if you want to go ahead, please do. And use your Old Testament thinking brain. Use your Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah 11, etc. thinking brain. And we'll talk about the devil and the 10-day tribulation, and then start with the next city from there. Thank you so much.